Game design. Quite possibly the most important asset for a game developer, besides learning how to steal the code from other people and put it off as your own. Having good game design is essential for a good game. It's kind of in the name. As Sir Isaac Newton once said, "You fool, if only your game had good game design, maybe it wouldn't suck as much." We all know that Sir Isaac Newton was very important due to his invention of gravity, so maybe we should learn a thing or two from him about game design. Hello internet, hello everyone, my name is Panda, and today I'm going to be presenting my collection of knowledge about game design and how to make a good game. Coming mainly from a consumer standpoint, as the only practically good game I have does not have good daily player count, but that might change eventually, I don't know. So if you didn't know what game design is, it's basically design, but game. I know, you can thank me later. It's practically the thought of how a game should work. There are many aspects I've wanted to talk about for a hot minute. The first concept is the premise. Premise is practically the idea of what the game is going to be. If you're not a guy that wants to make a quick buck off of others like a greedy CEO, usually the first thing that comes to mind when making a game is the premise, and not, how am I going to design this to make as much money as physically possible? Now, premises can really come from anywhere. It could be an idea from a friend, it could be playing a game and there's a mechanic that you could think could be improved on just a tiny bit, or you could just randomly be sitting on the toilet and then suddenly to have just a revelation. It can really come from anywhere. A premise usually has to be thoroughly thought out before being formed into a game, but make sure that the premise is not too complex, or else you'd be taking a bigger risk in both making it and also players understand it. There's sort of a Goldilocks zone where the game can be complex enough to where it's interesting, and simple enough where people can still understand it. Grow Garden is literally just that. I don't really think you could possibly comprehend a simpler premise. Scary Game, the game that I've been making, has a very complex premise, and is a very big game. I'm taking a big risk with making this game, but with good game design, it can pay off. It's not released, so I don't really know how that's gonna go, but anyway, the premise doesn't necessarily have to be innovative. Making something that is brand new and has never been done before can be interesting and very enticing, but there's not a guarantee that it will work, people will like it, or it fits correctly as a premise. There's kind of extra thinking you have to do. It's also kind of like a puzzle cube. If you don't put things in the right places, the puzzle won't go together. An important thing to think about to properly revise your premise is to know what audience you're aiming for. This can make it easier to know what to add and how much of what thing to add to the other thing. If you're aiming for an audience of iPad kids you can milk money off of, you probably want to make the game simpler. If you're aiming for more of a competitive audience, you want to make the premise more competitive, big brain move, aggressive, and risky. If you're aiming for an audience of intellectuals, you want to make the premise more complex and mature. Usually if you're making a game based on a trend, you'll get a younger and less mature audience. So if you're ever doing that, that's something to note. Just know what audience you're aiming for. It can be very helpful in designing your game. But practically the most important part to think about for a game is the core gameplay loop. The core gameplay loop is what is fun and entertaining for players. It's the loop that players get stuck in when they're playing the game. Think of Bear. The core gameplay loop is that one person gets chosen as Bear, unless you're in a one bounce around or double down, and the others are chosen to be survivors that complete puzzles to whittle down the time on the timer. The person chosen as Bear must eliminate all survivors before the round ends to win. Pretty simple. A core gameplay loop must be consistently fun and engaging, sort of simple, and have a set goal. Engagement is a very crucial part of the game. People are specifically chose to play the game. If they aren't able to play the game, then they're just gonna quit the game. Your game is not gonna get any players if, people are not engaged in the game. Your game should not be a waiting simulator, a lobby simulator, or a walking simulator, unless it's outright said to be that, in which people can look at your game and just skip past it because they don't want to play that type of game. The more space between the times the player is actively engaging in gameplay, the less they are going to want to play that game. It's sort of like dangling keys in front of a baby. The less frequently you dangle the keys, the less fun sounds and motion it makes, and the baby is less interested in the keys. You want to dangle the keys often, but also not too much. There is such thing as overstimulation, and the baby becomes upset because there are too many jangling keys with different shapes and noises, and it's just like a whole bunch of stuff. You want to cut out as much time as physically possible between the player playing the game and not, without making it so that the player feels like you're purposefully doing this to grab their attention. Though let me make this clear, tension is engagement, In a horror game, if the player is walking in a very dark room and it actually builds tension, you don't need to cut that out. Stories are also part of engagement, so your game won't entirely count as a waiting simulator if you have a story that you show. But if a certain cutscene is played too many times over, it gets to the point where it's probably just going to bore the player. Part of engagement and fun is also balancing. Balancing can be as simple as changing the relative difficulty of something. Take bots and muskets redux for example. In older versions, the bots were few in number and had really long reaction times, which made it way too easy. Now as you can see, it was changed to how the bots have a reaction time lower than the average human reaction time. So now it's borderline impossible. Wait, this might not be exactly a good example, but okay, you can just like see that it's specifically was changed to, well, not exactly increase user enjoyment. Maybe that's an example of how it's hard to figure out exactly what to balance or what not to do, I guess. Okay, it's sort of trial and error as to what will be fun and fit the premise of the game. It's kind of what testing is for. If you keep trying to make it easier or harder or keep changing it over and over and it's still not fun, you might need to think about changing something else. Balancing your entire game, however, if the core gameplay loop is longer or if there's meta progression, it's a different story. As you grow older, the dangling keys that were interesting to you as a baby might not be as interesting now, so you have to kind of change what interests you to fit your needs. This is very similar to balancing over time. As the player progresses in the game, the difficulty should increase, as well as new mechanics, skills, or items that should be introduced to accompany that increased difficulty. This is where I introduce the handy dandy chart that everybody knows and loves, known as the difficulty curve. This is a very good tool to visualize how the difficulty in a game should change over time. If the difficulty is great with little mechanics, the game becomes too hard and people hate your game. If the mechanics are abundant, but the difficulty is very easy, the game becomes bland and boring and people hate your game. There needs to be a balance. And difficulty and mechanics usually need to increase, otherwise the game just becomes stale. The line in which the game is enjoyable and has a nice balance between difficulty and mechanics is what I like to call the fun line. It's known as the difficulty curve because the fun line usually curves. The difficulty and mechanics don't necessarily need to start at 0, and the line doesn't necessarily need to be an exponential equation. It can be a line, it can be like a squiggle or something, it can even like do like a few loop-de-loops. I'm not entirely sure how you go about implementing that into the game, but you can! A few things to note is that difficulty can vary as mechanics increase, but it's usually not good to remove mechanics. As it might be well known, if there's more than one y-coordinate for a single x-coordinate, the thing you were looking at is not an algebraic function. Another thing to note is that you need to be careful about the difficulty of your core gameplay loop. Rage games usually start hard and keep getting harder at a faster rate than normal games. Unless you specifically market your game as a rage game, the difficulty should not look like this. If people are raging at your game and it's not supposed to be a rage game, you need to fix something. Either balance your gameplay or label it as rage game, which is not recommended as you as a developer should be able to properly balance your game and not just rely on calling it a rage game. If you can't, you are not a good developer. Simplicity, as stated before in the premise, goes both ways. Usually, keeping the core gameplay loop more simple can make it easier for players to get into the loop, which keeps engagement and fun at an all-time high. For strategy games, complexity is usually greater. That's kind of the reason that you're playing a strategy game. Depending on the premise of the game, the simplicity of the core gameplay loop can be higher or lower. Usually you just need to attune it to the player's enjoyment, which is practically just what this entire video is about. Part of simplicity is defining an end goal. If your player doesn't know what to do, that decreases the player's engagement in the game and lowers the chance of the player liking the game because it makes them overly confused for no reason when you can just simply define an end goal and say it to them. Having a goal and explaining that goal lets the players know what to do or what to strive for. Without explaining that or without a goal in general, players don't know what to do and get bored of just messing around with no point or progression. Sandbox games usually follow this pattern and don't have a goal or a set ending. Puzzle games, however, usually have players figure out how to go through the game on their own. But as stated before with balancing, you can't rely on saying, "This is a puzzle game," to ignore the fact that your players have no idea what the game is about. Tutorials can be a great way to allow for the game to still be complex, while allowing players an easy way to get into the loop. Many more complex games on Roblox do not have sufficient tutorials or just have tutorials that don't engage the player. If you're just going to make a bad tutorial, just save the player some time of playing a game that they have no idea what they're doing and just take the tutorial out. Tutorials should engage the player and show them the basics of the game and how the game works without punishing them, or at least too much. You can try and give the player hints about how certain things work, or have a sort of free response question to allow their brains to actually think of what to do. It makes it more engaging and makes the player feel less stupid. You can also leave out certain things that are pretty much a given to make the tutorial simpler and make it less as long. An example of this is saying spacebar to jump when that's pretty much given for all games. You don't entirely also need to make a lengthy and immersive tutorial if the controls are easy enough to be said within 3 words. If you say like X is to shoot or something, that's pretty much easy. On the earlier topic of showing how mechanics work, let's see how the mechanics should work. Mechanics are basically the interesting part of the game. There are controls or certain things a player has to do to properly progress in the game. It can be being able to slide, it can be grappling hooks, really anything. Bug collecting even can be a mechanic. The game I'm making called Scary Game has a simple mechanic in the factory map where there are shadows, and if you're inside the shadows, that will allow you to be hidden as long as you're not moving. So enemies that are going to go past you will not be able to see you as long as you're hiding in the shadows and not moving. However, if you move, they will be able to see you moving and will chase after you. You can see this probably in the most recent Scary Game update video, showcasing the new AI I created, which probably is also going to be remade again. This is an example of a mechanic. As said before, complexity can go both ways. But innovative and new mechanics do usually interest players. Being able to do something they can't in another game is the very reason why they play that game. Mechanics are always what is interesting about a game. If you don't have interesting mechanics, the game is probably boring. Now, thus far I've talked about the more game part of game design. Now there's another side that focuses more on the design part of game design, and I think that is also important too. There's certain intricacies in designing things that can make a game way more enjoyable. A big pet peeve of mine is that some games have an abundance of icons in their UI. Personally, I think that less UI or just more clean looking UI with like a single style is always better than having way too many buttons on the screen. It allows for more immersion and also makes your game look nicer and more clean, and people think, wow, an actually good game developer made this game, not some guy who just ripped off of assets of random people. It immediately gives people a good feeling about your game. Aside from UI, another very important aspect, I'd argue way more important, of game design is feedback. No, not that kind of feedback, I'll talk about that later. The type of feedback I'm talking about is the input-output feedback. Imagine there's a giant red button in front of you and you just look at it with great fear and curiosity, and then you reach out your hand and press it with your entire palm. Would you expect something great and fantastic to happen, or just something boring and minuscule? Like you just like tap it and then like nothing happens? Like there's not even a cool sound that plays, it's just nothing. Like you would be so absolutely just like, okay man, like really? Like why did I even press this button in the first place? Like it doesn't make sense. When players choose an input, they expect an output. Part of the reason I wanted to make this video was the suggestion I made to Bitrix about how the saber animation for the game was not at all satisfying. When you click with the saber, you expect to do some heavy and juicy swing, and not just like boop someone on the nose with it. You're not just like swinging it around like a wand or something. You want it to be like across the screen. It makes it more satisfying. When you perform an input, you expect an output and some sort of recognition that you made the input. Something that's like on a third of the screen, that's like tiny and insignificant, isn't going to fulfill the player. Have you ever watched a like satisfying video? Like one of those videos where that thing fits in perfectly with the other thing? Or like using a cookie cutter on something and like peeling away everything else and it leaves this like perfect shape. Yeah, something like that, just like satisfying. All those videos with 100 bajillion views, people like satisfying things, that's my main point. The more satisfying the output will be, the more people will like it. In most cases, the more presented an output can be without interfering with gameplay, the better. This doesn't just apply to animations, it also applies to sound design. ASMR is also a type of satisfying video, whether you like ASMR or not. Personally, I'm in the not.
but I do get a tingly feeling whenever I get a Vanquish and Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare 1, 2, or Battle for Naperville, because that pop and ding sound is so satisfying after getting a Vanquish that I put in Teen Turf Wars. Sound design doesn't only matter in feedback, it also matters in general. Sound design is very important in horror games. A horror game without sound is not scary compared to a horror game without visuals. Horror games are usually very dark and rely on tricking the brain and using sound design to build tension. And better than for it, relying on fear of the unknown and tricking the brain to imagine what it fears most is very, very good. Part of sound design is also music. Generally, people like music in a game because it makes the game feel less empty. Like Minecraft, most of the time, it kind of sort of feels empty until you just get that one song that plays and then everything just feels nice. But also sort of Minecraft feels like a horror game when you go into the caves and there's no music. And it's just it's very creepy and dark. And have you ever seen part of a film where a person edits it and excludes the music and it just seems empty? That's pretty much the point I'm going for. Music can make something feel so much more alive and can add so much more emphasis on things than visuals ever can. When releasing a game, it's also good to have enough content to let players enjoy playing the game and not become bored from lack of things to do. Therefore, in most cases, the more content, the better. But not too much content, especially without a good core gameplay loop, as that can make players feel overwhelmed and just not want to play the game anymore. Players can also be annoyed by fluff content, which is just copy and pasted content in order to fill everything to make the end goal harder to reach, or so that players play the game longer. Please just do not add filler content that is there for nothing. Unlike what you might expect, it lowers engagement and fun and makes it just really just slop content. And we do not need any more slop games on Roblox. We need actual good games that have good game design. Please, I'm begging you. If players have become used to and slightly bored of the content in your game, then updating is a probably good option. Updating the game and adding more content is not an alternative to fixing the core gameplay loop. People might just be leaving your game not because there's not enough content, but because of the fact that the core gameplay loop is just bad. So pay more attention on the core gameplay loop, as updating your game is better if your core gameplay loop is good and people are only bored because your game is lack of content, which usually can be solved by having enough content on release. But eventually players can keep on playing it and they look at all the content and stuff and become bored. Whatever, okay. Just focus on having a good core gameplay loop and adding content to the game. Enough content so that people will play the game and consistently like it. Marketing and monetization is what gets you players. Marketing specifically is what actually gives you players. Sure, you can just finish your game, nail everything, have very good game design, good core gameplay loop, good visuals, good satisfying everything, just everything is good, but your game will never have anything. You can wait days and days and weeks and months and years and nothing will happen. Nothing will get done because nobody knows about your game. It's just one of the games of the billions and trillions of games that are just on the platform that nobody plays. Without marketing your game, nobody will play it. The easiest way to market your game is to make some YouTube videos, shorts, or TikToks about it. Explain the main gimmicks or cool things about your game, or why people should play it. You can contact smaller YouTubers to check out your game, since it usually can't hurt them to do as such, especially if it has good game design, and it usually benefits them if the game is good. You can tell your friends about it. If you don't have friends, then try not to think about that. If you're playing a more chill game, you can ask others to try your game out. Just spread the word as much as you can, however you can, and the word might get spread more. You want to build as much attention towards your game as you possibly can. Now, once you get a few players, something else that Roblox will probably get to market your game is monetization. If you have good monetization and people are spending money on a game, Roblox cheaply is more likely to promote your game. That's kind of how just things work. Monetization is a big controversy on gaming in general, as people debate whether monetization is good to put into a game. It's completely fine if you want to earn some money from a game that you feel proud of. A simple donation game pass is a good way to ease players' aggression and still make some money, as players can show their support for you and still not be like doing something that's pay to win. Moving past donation game passes enters into the whether this is pay to win or not territory. You technically can be evil, though I just gotta warn you, if you are going to make pay to win game passes, people are not gonna like you as much and are not gonna want to support you. So just be mindful of that in your evil doing of making pay to win game passes. Though not all game passes would be pay to win, as cosmetic game passes exist as well. You can also pay to increase the chances of something, like being picked as the antagonist for something or to bypass something annoying, which is also kind of cheap and also follows in the line of, waiting simulator, I guess. Natural disaster survival even allows you to buy something to make the game harder, not just for everyone else, but also for you. This makes it less pay to win and also entertaining in general. There are many ways to add monetization without making something pay to win, but you theoretically still can do that. Not that you should. Now once you have enough players, listening to your player base is also a very good thing to do. Not listening to your community whatsoever is a recipe for disaster. Feedback is what makes your game better and what makes you better as a developer. Though there once again is a Goldilocks zone in listening. If you don't ever listen to your community, the community won't play your game as much as they will grow frustrated with the issues of the game. Though, if you listen to your audience too much, the game will no longer be yours. It will just become a mess with no direction. Your audience doesn't entirely know what your vision is for your game, so you should use your premise and your vision as the constitution to which you interpret feedback. If it's contrary to your vision, you can ignore it. But don't be stubborn about criticism and feedback though. Just because someone is criticizing your game doesn't give you the ability to just say, okay, I'm not going to add this because it's just be open to criticism and ideas and feedback, and that will make your game a lot better. Now, practically that is all I wanted to talk about. All about, core gameplay loop, game design, premise, monetization, marketing, all of these different things, design, UI, feedback. The last thing I want to talk about to wrap this whole subject up is using these principles to decipher why deepdivers and redux didn't maintain a good player base, and why infested initially failed. I'm not going to be talking about Bots and Musk's Classic because the only reason why it doesn't have a good player base now is because it was discontinued and the lack of content is making players bored. Deepdivers itself has a really good idea and premise, but it was not entirely executed well. Team balancing was the main issue, as people wanted to play the game, but were limited by team balancing, which was either broken or frustrating most of the time, as you couldn't become a diver because they're two little crabs, but you couldn't become a crab because the queen had laid eggs. This created a lock against you being able to play the game, which, as stated before, people play a game to play the game. And if they are locked away from playing the game, they're not going to play that game. This heavily decreased the player count and made it just spiral down into having practically no players ever. Deepdivers also had minimal content on release. Not sure where this comes from. And people quickly got bored of the game because there is no content. This is also the problem with Redux, but we'll get more to that later. The game also relied heavily on player interaction, and with the practical locking of people out of the game, this makes it so that people can't really play the game. It kind of just makes the game just meow. That's how I can describe it. This is sort of an issue in PvP games in general, as if you're ever making a antagonist versus survivor game, you usually early on want to include some sort of thing where a player is able to play with a bot. Because usually the first person to discover the game is playing by themselves, and most of the time we're going to assume that they either don't have any friends or aren't willing to invite the friends to play the game, because they can just join another game where there are a lot of other people, and it requires less effort for them to be in the game with other people. Mainly the reason why Deepdivers was discontinued was because of lag. But I don't think lag was as much of an issue as Bitrix made it out to be. I think it was more of just game design issue and all of the things I stated before. For Redux, since Classic is more of a successful game, let's just compare it with Classic. In Classic, you fight waves of interesting bots that have a formation that allow you to strategize with your teammates to learn how to best the AI. There are different guns, a lot of content, interesting gunplay, and different combinations of stuff that you can do. There are different maps with different terrain, open areas, and hiding places, as the cornfield map is different as you're able to hide behind through certain things, but then you have to go far away and sort of like maneuver your way around in the sort of like touch grass map. And Bridge, there are a couple different areas that you can go to easily kill all the bots. The gameplay is balanced and not too penalizing for something that you cannot control. The only real bad thing is the way that Mothman is programmed. Redux, on the other hand, has little content and a very frustrating core gameplay loop, which, as stated before, the core gameplay loop is practically the most important thing that you can have for a game. The bots you fight are scattered and have practically no predictability, which means you can't really best them. There's no strategy involved whatsoever, especially with how the bots There's practically just no strategy involved whatsoever, especially with how the bots have no reaction time and just shoot you. The weapons also are sort of broken, too penalizing, and not balanced, as the saber does the same amount of damage as the carbine hitting and has virtually no advantages. Redux only has one map with boring terrain and little to no interesting places to hide. The main thing is that the gameplay is way too penalizing. It's just not properly balanced and there's no content. And so because of this, Redux practically has a player count of 0. Infested, however, failed because there was little to no hype or like marketing whatsoever about the game. It just like sort of released randomly. Initially, it had practically no content and was just waiting simulator. Initially, it also had no content and it was practically just a waiting simulator, as mining was very slow. Okay, you can get what I'm doing. Mining was very slow and boring, and that's pretty much the only thing to do. And the only interesting part of that game was the spiders, which had no animation initially, and were just like spawned sporadically, and it was just an overall boring game. There's nothing to do, there's practically no goal, and there's practically no incentive for mining coal in the first place. Now, with all of these low player counts on Bitrux's games, there seems to be a Bitrux development dark age going on. But the issue is simply just with game design, and with better game design, the dark age can quickly get swept away and dealt with. For now, this is practically the end of the video, and I leave you with the information that you need to make your game as enjoyable as possible. Though, however, if you want to, you can add some things onto the comments to, I don't know, change or voice your opinions on all of the stuff about game design, as it's really needed for game developers of any kind to look at and to know. So this is practically it. This is Panda, and this is my video on game design. So goodbye for now.